Welcome back to Unboxing the Underground. I am so elated and honored to have here on the channel today Vincent Pereira, who is the writer, director, editor of 1997's A Better Place, which was put out originally by Synapse Films and was recently restored by OCN and put out on DVD and Blu-ray by MVD, and is now available via those formats and also on Tubi and Fossum, as well as Amazon Prime. And he is also known as the View Askew historian and has contributed creatively in many different facets of the classic View Askew films, Clerks, Chasing Amy, and Dogma. Vincent, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I've seen A Better Place many, many times. I remember finding the old Synapse DVD at FYE like in the, early 2000s. And I was totally blindsided by it. Like there really is nothing else like it in American indie cinema, certainly from that time period. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origins of that screenplay, like what inspired the narrative and how did you get it off the ground in terms of production?
So what inspired it was like in my high school years, I had like a core group of friends, but I was generally kind of rejected, like the popular cliques, and kind of was generally kind of introverted and kept to myself. And I guess I was kind of an angry kid as well. So there was that just sort of internal thing going on. And then I liked horror movies, so I liked dark, stories. Um, and what actually inspired me to write a better place was it was the case in the 1990s of the two British boys who kidnapped the toddler, um, Jamie. I can't remember his last name anymore, but they kidnapped the toddler and they murdered him, and that was a very big case at the time, and that just got me thinking about like making, not adapting that story, but sort of taking all that sort of high school angst that I had and making like a dramatic thriller about two kids in high school who murder another student. And it kind of warped and changed a little bit from that, where the Barrett character didn't want to, he obviously didn't want to be involved, and it was really the Ryan character. But that was the impetus of it. That was what started it, and then I just kind of ran with it, with things that, like, I thought, if you will, like, being an introverted, angry teenager a
So
few years prior to making it. As far as getting it off the ground, it just came down to when I started writing it, when I initially came up with the concept, Kevin was in post production on Clerks. We had filmed Clerks, and he was editing. It was the summer of '93. It hadn't gone to any film festivals yet, but I just got it in my mind that Kevin was 2 years older than me, and I wanted to be making a film the same age Kevin was when he made Clerks. So that kind of set the date as, okay, summer '95, which is 2 years from now. So I started writing. I wrote like 10 pages. The opening scene with Ryan getting in the fight with his aunt and pissing in the bathtub. Spoiler alert. So I wrote that scene, and I kind of just described to Kevin, like, hey, this is, I want to make this film about teenage violence. This is the beginning of it. What do you think? And I handed him those 10 pages, and he was like, dude, this is really good. You should keep going with this. And I kind of put it aside and didn't think about it for a while, and then meanwhile, Clerks took off. It started hitting film festivals, and it sold to Miramax, and Kevin went off touring the film. And now flash forward to like the spring of '94, and Kevin came back. He was back in town briefly from going touring the world, showing Clerks at film festivals, and he actually came into the Quick Stop while I was working at the video store. So he came into RST Video one day to hang out, and he actually gave me a gift. And if you give me a second, I'll show you the gift, because I still have it to this day. It was something that was really, really kind of cool. So give me 1 second. I think I
absolutely.
know where it is. 1 second, I'll be right back.
Yep, no problem.
So one of the places that Kevin had gone, touring Clerks, was he had gone to Japan and showed it at a film festival. And if you know the history of Kevin, our friendship, we bonded over Twin Peaks. And Kevin bought me, if you can see it, this
Wow.
beautiful gatefold laserdisc set of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me from Japan, because the American laserdisc was a disaster. It was improperly letterboxed, and so he came back with this beautiful Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me laserdisc, and I've had it ever since. So that was the gift he gave me. But then he sat down, and we were just chilling out for like he was just chilling out at the store talking, And he goes, Vincent, that story that you came up with a while back, that high school violence thing. He's like, you should continue writing that. He's like, because if you write it, he's like, I'll finance it. And I was like, oh, okay. So that got me going, and I started writing in earnest at that point. And I called in my friend Paul Finn, who I went to high school with. He was a year or two under me at Middletown High School South, but he was a local kid he was very much into art and very much into movies. And he would always come in and we would chat about movies. And I was like, hey, want to help me put this thing together and co-produce it. So, I was going back and forth, sending pages to Paul, and he was giving notes, and I finished the first draft of A Better Place, like 2 days before I flew out to Minnesota to work on Mallrats, and I pushed myself to get it done. It was March of '95. I was like, I want to go there and hand Kevin the script, and I did. I handed him the script. He read it during the making of Mallrats, and he was like, okay, we'll do this summer. And he set a budget. At the time, it was 30,000, and I was like, okay, well, I'll try to make it for that amount. It's a little more complicated than Clerks, but I'll see what I can do. It ended up between 40 and 50, which I think is still pretty damn good given it's a pretty complex film. There are a ton of locations. I ignored I ignored the advice, of course. Kevin wrote Clerks set in one location. It's like if you're making a super low budget movie, just set it in one location. And I remember when I was reading, when I read the first draft of Clerks, there was actually a very long sequence where Dante helps an old woman take her groceries home, and it's this long nighttime walk and talk, and it was wonderful dialogue. And I said to Kevin, I'm like, yeah, Kevin, that's a wonderful scene. I'm like, but man, you have like a 5-page nighttime walk and talk with this old lady, like that's gonna be pretty complicated to film. And Kevin ended up cutting from the screenplay. Meanwhile, I go ahead and I write the screenplay that has multiple locations, a high school, various characters, special effects. So I didn't listen to I didn't even listen to my own advice. I just wrote what was in my heart, and wrote this thing. Somehow we were able to pull it off, you know.
And it comes across beautifully. And to your credit, I mean, it really doesn't feel like you have as little money as you did.
Thank
Which
you.
brings me to my next question. In terms of casting, what was the process of procuring your two leads, and how did you manage to like so vividly conjure up that relationship on screen? Because as good as they are by themselves, like that movie really lives and dies by their interplay.
But yeah, by their interplay. I mean, we just had a regular. Well, we did. I did what Kevin did. Like I took out an ad in Backstage, and I said, "Hey, come, audition for this." Unlike, at this point, Clerks was blowing up, so Kevin's name was known. So unlike Clerks, where he didn't get a huge turnout, it was mostly locals. We had hundreds of people show up, and we held the auditions at the same theater that Kevin did. It was the First Avenue Playhouse in Atlantic Highlands. Hundreds of people showed up, and I cast through those auditions. I really only cast two parts. I cast Todd, Joseph Cassesi, who played Todd, and I cast Ian Bailey, who got the Ryan part. And a lot of the people who came in, it was a lot of female actresses, and a lot of females. And of course, you watch the film, it's those two leads. So I was looking for guys, and unfortunately, because I had written the screenplay, I went to Minnesota with a first draft. Then I met Jason Lee and his then wife Carmen, and Carmen had a really really interesting personality and kind of magnetism. So I was like, I kind of need to open this up a bit. So I ended up in the second draft. I wrote the Augustine character, and I wanted Carmen to play it, but it wasn't guaranteed that she could play it because Jason and Carmen lived in Los Angeles. So I ended up, in the audition, like when we put out the casting call, it was like, well, we really should put that out just in case Carmen can't make it. So we had like hundreds of 20 something women reading for Augustine. And there was not nearly as many guys showed up. And I really, and at a certain point in the day, I was feeling a little despondent because I was like, oh God, I'm not seeing anybody who could play Brian. And Joseph Cassesi actually, he wanted to read for a part. We asked people to come with like a prepared monologue, which is what Kevin did with Clerks. Joseph said, "Hey, can you give me some sides from the screenplay from whatever character you think I'd be best for?" And Joseph was kind of athletic looking, so I was like, okay, he'd be Ryan if anything. So we gave him some Ryan sides, and he was very good. And then so it was like, okay, we're definitely going to cast this guy in some part. He was really good. At a certain point in the day, I was like, I was kind of exhausted and hungry. So I'm like, you know what? I got to walk down to the Chinese restaurant and get some food. Just continue the auditions, and let me know what happens when I come back. So I left. I came back about 15 minutes later, and everybody in the room was like, "Okay, Ben, you just missed Ryan." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "This guy just came in, and he was brilliant, and he is Ryan." And I'm like, "What? He just left?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Could somebody run down and see if maybe you catch him at the bus stop and see if you can bring him back?" Luckily, he hadn't gotten on the bus to Manhattan yet. So they were able to bring him back, and he did the monologue a second time for me, and he was just brilliant. And later on, I got to watch the videotaped first monologue, and I'm like, both of them were brilliant. I'm like, okay, there's no question, this guy is Ryan. And he was attending the American Academy of Dramatic Arts at that point. He had just finished his first year, so he was 19 years old. He ended up being the youngest guy on our cast. And so those two were cast out of there. The other ones came generally from friends. I mean, I decided to play Jake because it was a small part, and it was like, okay, this is one less actor I have to worry about, getting on set. I can do this little part. The character of Justin was another one of the three, the three bullies. He was just a friend of Paul's and a friend of Rob's who ended up playing Barrett. And he just had this very naturalistic way about him, and it seemed okay. The chemistry worked between me and him, and we ended up casting Joseph Cassesi, who gave that really good reading as doing sides. We ended up giving him Todd, the bully, and we all worked together. And Barrett was interesting because it was, again, Rob was just a friend. Like, he was a friend of Paul, like my co-producer, and he was a couple years below me at Middletown South. So Rob and Paul were friends, and Rob was like, Paul was like, Rob's a very good actor. Maybe he could read for this. He's got kind of this thing. I was like, well, okay, let's see. And he was just great. Like, we had like three people who were considering for Barrett, and we read them all with Ian, because Ian was clearly Ryan, and Ian was like, there's no question, Rob's the one. And they just had a really great chemistry together. It worked out well. And there's an interesting story too, because at one point, as we were leading up to production, again, Jason Lee he was good friends with Giovanni Ribisi, and Jason was like, "Hey, Vonnie might be good for this as Barrett," and I was like, "That was a pipe dream." I'm like, "Okay, whatever, yeah." I mean, and Jason actually got Giovanni Ribisi read a scene with Carmen and sent me a tape, and Giovanni Ribisi was really good. So at a certain point, it was like, "Oh my God, do I cast Giovanni Ribisi or cast Rob Patry as Barrett?" It was like, ultimately I went with Rob, not because Giovanni Ribisi was bad, and he would have probably helped sell the film, especially since right after that he ended up being in like Saving Private Ryan. He ended up being fairly well known. It came down to, I was like, this is a $50,000, at the time $30,000 really low budget film. I really should give the part to, because they were both excellent. I was like, I really should give the part to the person who's like, who's never done anything. And I don't regret it, because Rob is absolutely brilliant in that part. But he just fell into it because he was so natural. Like, we would give him sides, and he would just look at the sentence and say the word, and the way the sentence came out of his mouth, just, it didn't seem actorly, it didn't seem forced. It just worked perfectly, worked beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, every time I watch the film, I mean, he really is like the entry point, the emotional entry point for me anyway, into that film. Right down
Yeah,
to an opening voiceover is just it just pulls you in this very human performance.
yeah,
Um, Switching gears to a bit more of the technical side of things, can you talk about the process of shooting the film on 16? Obviously, this production predates digital by a
yeah.
decade minimum. How often were you able to review rushes, and what was your like collaborative process with your DP, as far as like knowing the framing and just the nuances of capturing what you captured?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I would set the framing. I left it to the DP to deal with lighting and exposures, but I would explain to him what I wanted. But the framing, I would always look through the camera and frame up the shot and be like, okay, that's our framing. We didn't have video tap, so as far as rushes, it was maybe every 2 or 3 days we would be able to look at footage, but we weren't able to look at any of the high school footage for the whole first week of shooting because we had to finish up at the high school. Like we had a set, we scheduled the high school for the first week of shooting. Um, we just had to finish it. No time to look at footage. It was being dropped off at the lab. I think it was only the first, maybe the Sunday after the first week of shooting, that we actually got to sit down in the backyard and look at some some dailies projected on 16 millimeter in my backyard. Yeah, so it was every couple of days perhaps, and at a certain point I didn't really keep looking at them because we were just rushing to completion. We were really really like trying to finish this thing because we started running over budget, running over schedule. And of course, one of the problems with not seeing the high school footage until we were out of the high school was that there's a shot at the end of a sequence that was completely out of focus. Not just out of focus, like the shutter was apparently off in the camera, and the image, it's like a double image, and we did 3 takes of that scene, and all 3 takes looked that way. Something just went wrong with how the film was loaded in the camera and how the shutter was working, and there was no way I could fix that. And there was no way I could cut it because it was the end of the scene. I just couldn't go from the shot prior to the next scene. I needed that ending of the scene because it's Barrett sitting down next to Ryan, and they have their first interaction. So I just had to kind of bite my tongue and use it. We were able to fix it a little bit for the Blu-ray. People hate AI, and I hate AI when it's improperly used. But for that particular shot, I handed it to a friend of mine who does a lot of work with AI upscaling, and I was like, Franny, can you do something with this shot? And Franny was able. It was kind of an interesting process because we scanned the negative in 3K, and we had a beautiful 2K master from the negative that OCN Digital did. And what Franny was able to do was she down-resed the shot to standard definition, and then re-up-resed it with AI back to 2K. And somehow it's still a double image, but somehow that made the underlying image come much more into focus. So we did AI up-resing on that one shot just to try and fix the focus issue. And it still looks funky. It still has that weird double image, but now the underlying image is in focus. You can see Ryan's face, you can see his eyes, you can see Barrett's face. So we were able to fix that shot a little bit with AI, but that's the only AI I did on the film. Everything else is just, it's just a straight scan of the negative, and about 2 minutes of footage came from a print. And as far as shooting on 16, um, I mean, you know, you got to deal with actually lighting the image. Like there's that. Like a lot of people shoot digital and they just use completely natural light. But then again, some people shooting in 35 and 16 use natural light. But in this case, we lit it for the interiors. For exteriors, we would have to use bounce cards and occasionally some filters on the lenses if it was too bright and things like that. So it's just a slightly different skill set than shooting on digital. And I'm glad it was shot on film because it still has that texture and there's a depth to it. And when you scan a negative, there's so much latitude. You can do a lot with the color correction. I didn't go crazy with the color correction. I was really happy with how the Synapse DVD looked. And the Synapse DVD was scanned from a low contrast print, which already had the photochemical color timing baked in. So when we were doing the Synapse transfer way back in 1999, we really just ran that print through a Spirit data cine, and we didn't touch the color much at all. It was generally just occasionally tweaking the contrast and slight tweaks, but that print, the lab did such a good job of the color timing that I was very happy with how the print looked. So when OCN did the scan, and if you ever seen a raw negative scan, it's a complete, there's like no contrast in the image because you add that all in post. So it's a very flat image, but you can see all the detail in the negative. So my notes to OCN Digital, because I was in Michigan, they're in Connecticut, I was like, all right, here's a rip of the DVD. Follow the color on the DVD. My cat's meowing. The feline Ginger, who you may know if you've looked at my Facebook page. No,
Absolutely.
Ginger, I'm on Zoom. So Ginger, please stay down. I love you, but so anyway, my notes to OCN Digital were follow the color on the DVD, but the new negative scan had so much new shadow detail, and there was so much latitude to it that I said, don't follow it for contrast because the DVD is a little plugged up in the contrast because we went off of a print. It was a great transfer for its time, but looking at it now, like some of the detail gets swallowed up in black. And I said to them, look, for contrast, all I want you to do is balance the shots within each scene and then give it enough contrast to give the image a little depth, but I don't want to lose that shadow detail. And we went back and forth a few times. Once they nailed it, they nailed it. And I'm incredibly happy with how the final Blu-ray master turned out.
Absolutely. I have not seen the actual Blu-ray disc itself, but I did just watch the restoration on
Mm,
Fawsome TV, which is like
yeah,
a slightly cropped 16 by 9 version as opposed to your original 151. Um,
yeah,
I was so impressed with like it. I mean, I've seen the DVD so many times. It really is faithful to that transfer, and like
yeah,
it's just more detail and just that much more beautiful to look at.
yeah. And that's something to point out that I intentionally did um the streaming transfers because the streaming sites, they like full frame, like they like to fill the screen, and most people watching streaming, they like their screens filled. So when we shot A Better Place, we actually were protecting for 166 in camera, which is very close to 178. But when we did the video transfer, I just liked showing as much of the 16 frame as I could, and that meant going edge to edge on the film, which exposed the curved edges of the frame, and there's like all sorts of gunk at the top and bottom of the 16 frame. So putting that 1.5 to 1 mat in, you're able to cover that up and also give a little bit of wiggle room to move the image up and down, shot to shot if you need it to be. So I just grew to really like that shape and aspect ratio, and I came to say, okay, this is the shape A Better Place should be in. And I've carried it over to the Blu-ray. But for the streaming services, I was like, you know what? They like full frame. That'll make it more attractive to the streaming services. Okay, we'll do a 178 to 1 version. So Mike Felsher, you might know from Red Shirt Pictures, he does tons of supplements, and now he's actually putting out Blu-rays and 4Ks of his own. He's a good friend of mine. He lives only a few miles from me, and I went over to his house to put the edit together because the film on the negative is different from the final cut. So we did the editing together, and then I left it in his hands. I'm like, okay, we finalized the 1.5 to 1 master, and I was like, hey Mike, do me a favor, put together a 16 by 9 transfer, and just watch it and make sure you frame the shots up and down as needed, so nothing important is cropped. So he on his own, he put together a really nice looking 16 by 9 transfer for the streaming sites.
And I'm glad it's more available to people because I think for quite a few years, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't available to stream digitally anywhere.
Well, yeah, not for ages. It was briefly in the early days of Netflix streaming. It was actually up on Netflix for like a good 6 months or a year. But that was way back in the early days. That was before Netflix was even producing their own stuff. That was like 2010, 2011. It was up on Netflix. But ever since then, no, it hasn't been available except for some bootleg sites I've seen that some bootleg sites that they were showing the Netflix stream. They had downloaded it and put it out there. So yeah, now having the new high def version out there is wonderful. I consider it to be like an extended trailer. Like watch it on Tubi, watch it on Fawsome, rent it and watch it on Amazon. And then if you want to own the best version, buy the Blu-ray.
Absolutely.
Because it's much better compression on Blu-ray. Plus, it's my preferred aspect ratio. Although it does work in 16 by 9, that 1.5 to 1 shows more picture top and bottom. I just that's my preferred look for the film.
Switching gears to the violence in the film,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a movie of this budget, how did you manage to depict it like so viscerally? Even from the opening act, like the nosebleed, all the
Mm-hmm.
way to the climactic gunfire, like it all feels so bruising and real. Um, and it's still startling to me. How did you conjure up like the makeup team, and how did you shoot all of these sequences to be so real?
Yeah. I mean, growing up loving horror movies, I read a lot about horror movies. So I kind of had an idea of what we could do just based on that. Like I used to have Tom Savini's Grand Illusions book, also known as Bizarro. So I just kind of had an idea in my mind. Okay, I know I could do a nosebleed by, I had an idea of what we could do realistically. And I actually, in the screenplay, I specifically, spoiler alert, when the final death of the film, I had in my mind exactly how to shoot that scene. And I didn't really have. I knew that you could do a prosthetic for a wound on the head and things like that. I just knew, like, okay, these things can be effective, but they won't cost an arm and a leg to do. Um, when we were gearing up to make the movie, we didn't have a makeup, a special makeup effects artist in mind. And I remember initially we were talking to some students at Tom Savini's school about doing it, and then we got a note, like basically we had put up the audition notice, like, hey, we're having auditions for the film here, and I don't think even in the audition notice that it mentioned that the film was violent, but there was a local guy in Tom's River, New Jersey, Anthony Mandiel, who was a burgeoning special makeup effects artist, and he hit us up. He's like, hey, I don't know if your film has any special makeup effects in it, but I'm a local guy. I love horror movies. I'm getting into special makeup effects. Maybe I could do them if you have them. I was like, oh, cool. This guy's local. Let's go meet him. And we met him, and we described to him what we were looking for, and how he got the job was he did bruising makeup on a couple of friends of his, and he took Polaroids. So like he got that, like he knew, again, he knew makeup effects, and he knew what I was describing, what I wanted, and he was like, oh yeah, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And then I was like, okay, well, like, look, show us a sample of what you can do based on what's in the screenplay. And how he got it was like he took a couple of his friends and he did bruising makeup on them, and he handed me the Polaroids, and it looked like somebody who had really had the shit kicked out of him. And I was like, okay, you're in. Just give us a budget, and he wasn't super expensive. He gave us a budget, and we're like, okay, so we need the nosebleed, we need the wound on the head, we need the bullet wound at the end, and he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's
And you,
very much one of the more memorable aspects of the film is just how hard hitting the violence is, and even on budgets of four, five, six times the size, it's not nearly as much as A Better Place.
well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I was. That's one area where I was thinking about the budget writing. I didn't write like he gets his arm chopped off, and I didn't go crazy and have shit like that. I was like, well, this is stuff I know I can do. This is stuff, again, thinking the Tom Savini way, which is when he talks about these things being illusions, and it's sometimes the simplest way to do them is that's how you do them, and they look more realistic that way. Like that's how I approached writing the violence and filming it as well. So the other thing that really helped was just in the sound mixing, like when there's a shot in the film, what I'm talking about, where somebody falls, their neck falls on a rock, when you add that when the head hits you, that crunch, people are like, but if you show it without the sound effect, people kind of chuckle. The second you put that sound effect in there, chuckles go out the window, you know. Sound goes a long way as well. It's like all the aspects working together.
Definitely. I remember on the original DVD, there's the Skywalker sound mix, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a comparison in the special features to the original, I think, mono sound mix, and
Yeah, yeah,
it is night and day. I mean, to
yeah.
your credit, it is just a completely different sequence.
Basically, I was working as an assistant editor on Dogma, and that was the first film that Kevin mixed at Skywalker. A great guy named Phil Benson was the sound editor on Dogma, and so I was working on that, and at the same time we were prepping A Better Place for DVD release, and I guess Scott Mosier had shown like just a screener of A Better Place to Phil, and Phil was like, hey, you're doing a DVD of this. Like sometimes at Skywalker we do pro bono remixes for indie filmmakers. Would you like to do a 5-1? And I was like, sure, yeah. So we went back to all the original DAT tapes of the raw dialogue. The old mono mix was done off of MagTrack that had been run through, a Steambeck editing machine dozens of times. So we went back to the original digital DAT tapes for the dialogue. Um, Phil did some amazing sound design work, just to make some of the really really big moments in the film come alive. The main guy who had done the music for the film, a guy named uh, Michael Jurgensen, who is now a member of Wilco. He composed um, a bunch of original music for the film with a friend of his named Tom Meisner. They went by the name of Auto versus Pedestrian for the soundtrack work on A Better Place. And I just gave him, I'm like, I really like, Italian horror movies like the music in a Dario Argento movie. So do something like that. So he came back with just these kind of ambient tracks that worked beautifully in the film. And and then for the Skywalker mix, he gave us much cleaner versions of them. So all the music sounded better. It was just a fantastic opportunity to actually go to Skywalker Sound and mix the film. And one of the main mixers is Gary Rizzo, who at the time was really just starting out as far as sound mixing went, and now he's won a few Academy Awards. So A Better Place was co-mixed by a now Academy Award-winning sound mixer at Skywalker, Gary Rizzo. And for
That
the Blu-ray, I made a few. I sweetened it a little bit. I made a few minor adjustments, and it's nothing that Skywalker did wrong. It's just that at the time I was so overwhelmed by working with Skywalker that there were things I should have asked them to do that I didn't ask them to do. Like they would just present something to me and be like, "Yeah, sounds great." And then in retrospect, I'm like, "Ooh, I really should have told them to do this there." It's because it's not like they wouldn't have done it. They would have listened to the director. It was just that at the time I was like overwhelmed by being at Skywalker. And now all these years later, I was able to go in and tweak a couple little things, like maybe a dozen places in the soundtrack. I've made some little adjustments for the 5.1 mix. Plus, when I added footage back into the film, the Blu-ray has about a minute of extra footage or so. Those I had to bridge those sequences, because you can't just lay in raw dialogue recorded on set. No, you got to make sure it matches the ambience, any music that's in the scene, So I had to go in and copy ambience tracks and make sure that I mixed all that in with the new material that was going in so that everything would be seamless. So
right. I mean, just out of curiosity, how many days did you have at Skywalker for that original mix?
it was 4 days basically. It was like we did the film was cut. The film was split into four reels, so we did a reel a day. But actually, it went to a fifth day, and I had to leave because like I was in San Francisco staying at my friend Justin Lomba's house, like a friend of mine who I met while I was touring. I was touring A Better Place around the country, showing it at various venues, and I was in San Francisco, and this young guy comes up to me. He's like, "Yeah, man, I really liked your movie. Hey, well, how long are you going to be in San Francisco for?" I'm like, "Oh, like 4 more days. Oh, let me show you around." So this guy who I didn't know like showed me all around San Francisco, and we've become friends ever since. And when I was coming back out to mix A Better Place at Skywalker, he lived right outside. He lived a half hour from Skywalker. He's like, "Yeah, he just bought a new house with his then wife, and was like, yeah, come stay here." So I had a place to stay, but basically I was going to be there for 2 weeks, and then I had to go home. We got through the first three reels while I was there, and then they did the fourth reel without me, but knowing what I wanted. And that was another reel where I made a few tweaks because I wasn't there, there were some things where I was like, okay, they didn't quite get this right. Nothing against them. It was just I wasn't there. Like they were doing it on their own. So they got 95% of the fourth reel perfect. And that little 5% I was able to go in and fix up, tidy up this time around.
Now you alluded to it just before, but so you finished the film, and what was the journey like to the festival circuit, and what was like the initial reactions when you first screened it to an audience?
It was, it took about 2 years of post production because we filmed it in the summer '95, and then money would trickle in, and each time money trickled in, I was able to do a little bit more. Like I was able to do the original 16 millimeter sound mix in New York over a period of like 2 months on weekends when they could schedule me, and then finally we were able to get the negative cut, and then finally we were able to get an answer print. So finally it was around spring summer of '97 when we actually were able to get a print of the film. And then I started um, we had been submitting to film festivals a really rough version transferred from the work print, no sound mixing, which I never should have done, but we were kind of pressured into doing it. It was like, okay, start submitting. I'm like, well, the film's not done, but we did. Okay, never didn't get accepted to any of those early film festivals. In '97, when we finally had a print, with a sound mix, something that looked fairly professional, then it started getting accepted into film festivals. And the first big one was the Hamptons in the fall. Well, first I went to the Independent Feature Film Market, which is just a market. That's not a festival. You just pay and you get a slot. It's you go there, you show your film, you try and promote it. So that was the first place it screened, and it was a pretty big audience because at that point, Clerks was a kind of legendary. So whereas Clerks had 10 people in the screening, I had a full crowd. So that was a really good screening. That was the first time I really screened it for a big audience, and it got a good reception. And then it got into the Hamptons International Film Festival, and it got a good reception. And initially you're kind of nervous, but as the film starts getting good receptions, I got more and more comfortable with it. And I ended up touring the film around colleges and different film festivals for like 2 years. And I would do a speaking engagement after each one, and I really enjoyed doing that. Kind of want to do it again, actually. Like now that the film's finished and in high definition, I want to schedule some screenings, like at film schools and at colleges, and show it and talk about the film. So hopefully, I'll be able to do that before too long. There's a big film school not far from me in Troy, Michigan. Um, the Michigan Film Institute, and I have some friends in Facebook. One of my friends in Facebook actually owns it, so hopefully I'm going to reach out to him and say, "Hey, man, could I show my film and do it? Basically do kind of a class, like a master class." So hopefully that'll happen. Another friend of mine teaches guitar at another local Michigan college, and he says they've got a big screening room. So I'm like, okay, well, put me in touch with the arts department there, and I'll try and set up a screening there. So hopefully that'll lead to some local screenings and some talking about the film, which would be fun. But yeah, it was just once I had a screener tape, I started sending it out, started getting into festivals, and the festival run was fun. It went on for a long time. It was like 2.5 years, festivals and colleges.
And now, how did it finally land at Synapse originally?
Well, I mean, we hoped for theatrical, and there was some initial like interest, like October Films, which no longer exists, but at the time they were a fairly big independent distributor. They were interested, but nothing came of those early interests with distribution. And then it was around '98. So I've been showing the film at festivals. It played at the Vulgarthon, and Synapse was just beginning because Don May had been at Elite Entertainment, which he had co-started, and then he left Elite and he started Synapse with his good friend Jerry Chandler, and they had only put out two titles at that point, and this was the beginning of DVD. Laserdisc was still a thing at the time, so he got in touch with Kimberly Lochran, now Kimberly Garby, who was she was the she ran the office at View Askew, and he sent her a couple of their DVDs at the time, which was Dario Argento's World of Horror and the George Romero documentary about the making of Dawn of the Dead, Document of the Dead. And he was like, hey, we're big fans of Kevin. We heard that he was maybe producing some really small independent films. We might want to look at them. So, I was like, oh, I love fucking Don May. Like, I collected the Synapse laser discs. I had Night of the Living Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those were great laser discs. And I had heard he was starting a new company. And I'm like, yeah, I'll send him a screener. I sent him a screener. He dug it. They signed it. That was really it. And I've been friends with Don ever since. Like, I actually didn't speak to Don for a few years, and we recently reconnected. So it was really kind of cool. Like after not speaking to Don May for a few years, to like kind of restart that friendship, which is pretty neat. Yeah, it was just a matter of like it didn't get theatrical, and it was just kind of kept showing at colleges and festivals. And Don liked the film, Jerry liked the film, and they were like, "Hey, let's do it." And I said, "Oh, by the way, do you mind if I recut it?" They're like, "Nope, we love filmmakers. Do what you want." So everything worked out. Like it was a great experience doing that DVD.
I also love, I remember like really going through it. There's like the hidden commentary, which I think is now a proper bonus feature.
Yeah, yeah, on the
There's just
Blu-ray.
so many fun elements of that disc that I really got lost in just as a young film fan.
Yeah, that's the two. There were three Easter eggs. It was the hidden commentary. No, there were two Easter. No, there were three. There was the hidden commentary. There was the Big Helium Dog teaser trailer, and then there was an outtake reel which was hidden in the color bars. And now all three of those are on the Blu-ray, but they're not hidden. They're just right there. Yeah, all the special features from the DVD are on the Blu-ray except for the Skywalker comparison, and that's because I made additional changes. So I was just like, well, this is kind of redundant at this point. So I just left that off. But you
Now,
have basically the whole DVD version on there. You actually have the whole DVD version on there. So you can look at the Synapse transfer and you can see the changes between the Synapse, the edit I did for Synapse and, the MVD edit, which are not drastic. There's about a minute and a half there's about a minute of new footage I made a couple of minor edits, and there's a handful of visual effects fixes that, well, aside from the fix earlier I talked about that my friend Franny Lane did, kind of upresing that shot and getting it more in focus. A friend of mine in California, Seth Martin, very accomplished visual effects artist. If you look up his credits in IMDb, he worked on Avatar 2. He worked on Guardians of the Galaxy. He's the real deal. He was a fan of A Better Place, and he was like, "Hey, if you need any fixes, I'll do them for you." I was like, "Okay." So he did about a half dozen digital fixes. Nothing like Star Wars, you know, not Greedo shoots first. I'm talking about cosmetic fixes, little continuity errors and things that he fixed to make the film flow a little better. So you
Now, I
can
won't,
you can go through the DVD and then look at the Blu-ray and try and find them, because I'm not going to tell anyone what they are. So you can find them on your own.
if you do screen comparisons of the two transfers, basically.
Oh yeah, you'll be able to see them. Yeah, you'll know what they are if you look for them.
Now, I won't take up too much more of your time, but as far as like the general restoration process from
Mhm.
OCN Digital, how did that come about in the first place?
Well, I mean, for MVD licensed the film. I was talking with Eric Wilkinson over there for quite some time, and we finally came to a deal to license it. And again, like I said, I'm in Michigan, he's in New Jersey, so he actually drove to the stash because the negative was in the basement of the stash. I was actually very worried for a long time. I thought because I thought the negative might have been lost because the lab went out of business. It was Magno Sound's lab in New York, LabLink, and they had gone out of business in like the early 2000s. And I was like, shit. I mean, I hope they sent the negative back to View Askew, but I didn't know whether they did or not. And when I was back in New Jersey in the summer of 2018 for the Volgathon, I said, hey, can I go dig through your storage facility, because I really want to see what's there, and I'm hoping to find my negative. And luckily enough, my negative, the Big Helium Dog negative, and the Vulgar negative, they were all at LabLink, and they were all sent back to View Askew. So I was like, oh, thank God. My negative is here. I have my negative. Cool. So Eric picked up the negatives. He brought them up to OCM because he had a relationship with them. Because, they're the Vinegar Syndrome guys. They do all their own stuff, but they have their own lab. They have OCN Digital, which is, it's kind of part of them. It's separate too. They do work for other companies. So Eric, they have. I think they've even upgraded to a new scanner now. But at the time, they had an AriScan, which is a fantastic scanner. So they just, they did the scanning because they had a relationship with MVD, and Eric had a relationship with them. And the footage that was put back into the film, where the negative trims had been lost, that was scanned from a print that I had. I had the work print, so it was in terrible condition, and that was sent over to them, and it was scanned again on the same scanner, which revealed all of the damage. When they first sent me that footage, I was like, oh my God, this looks terrible. But they were able to clean that up considerably. It still looks a little different. You'll still be able to notice, oh, okay, this looks a little softer, and you can see there's a little flickering in the image. But if I showed you the before and after, it's kind of a miracle how they were able to clean that material up, because it was the material that had been run through the editing machine dozens of times, was covered with dirt, tape, splices, and they were able to fix it up really, really well. But yeah, it was just a matter of that's who MVD worked with, and they did a fantastic job.
And a piece of history was preserved.
Yeah, 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 yep. The negative,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
Now, final question. I'm sure you probably get this a lot, but what's down the pike for you? What's next for you? Do you have any creative projects you can talk about? Anything you have going on? Just in any creative sense.
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, first off, there's an A Better Place comic book adaptation in the works, and I'm not a huge comic guy, but I respect the art form. It's not. I never really read comics, but it's one of those things where I respect the art form. And a friend of mine on Facebook, who's an independent comic artist, Chrissy Weissman, she's also a big View Askew fan. A couple years back, she was like, "Hey man, can I see your film?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." So I sent her a rip of the DVD, and she really dug it. And she has her own comic label, and she got back to me. She's like, "I really, really responded to this. What would you think about doing a comic adaptation?" And I was like, "Absolutely." I'm like, "If you want to do a comic adaptation, absolutely." And the other thing that made it interesting to me is that, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote a screenplay that was far bigger than the budget I had. And in filming it, we cut many things down. We simplified a lot of things. So I was like, oh, for the comic, I can now do those things that are, that I couldn't afford to film. Like, so now the comic is not, it's not a carbon copy of the film. It's a true adaptation. and she came up with some interesting ideas for the characters and backstories. I came up with a different opening compared to what the opening of the film is. So it's it follows the same essential plot line as the film, but there's a lot of stuff you're going to find. There's a lot of rich stuff in it that's not in the film. So there's that. There's a horror screenplay that I had written that was originally intended to be my follow up to A Better Place. It was a murder mystery. I call it my American Giallo because I'm a huge fan of Dario Argento and the Italian horror movies and the Italian murder mysteries. So I wrote this what I call an American Giallo, the screenplay called Autograph. Um, and it took me years to get that screenplay right. And when I finally got the screenplay, I was like, yes, this is it. I was like, I don't want to make this fucking movie. So I'd written this screenplay and I got it to a point where I thought this is a good movie. I'm like, but I don't want to make this movie. I don't want to make movies like this. I want to make really small, weird indie films. And this was something more like commercial. So over the years, I've, I've been like, I'd be cool with someone else making it. And I actually sent it to another filmmaker and, I guess they weren't interested, but, so it's just been kind of sitting here unproduced for years. And after Chrissy had approached me about doing A Better Place, I thought, well, maybe we could turn it into a graphic novel. But then, out of the blue, another friend on Facebook, who's a professional writer, he hasn't written fiction yet, but he's written about film for years. Like I don't want to mention his name yet in case he doesn't want to be revealed yet because we just started working on it. But he emailed me out of the blue. He's like, hey, I really love The Better Place. I've been friends with you on Facebook for years. You might know I'm a writer. I'm like, yeah, I've read a lot of this guy's stuff. He writes for a lot of major movie sites. He's like, I've been wanting to branch out into writing novels and fiction. And I remember you'd written this screenplay called Autograph, and it's never been produced. Would you think about adapting that to a novel? And I'm like, yeah. I was like, it's just sitting here gathering dust. Why not? So I scanned it. I only had a printout of it. I sent him the PDF and he really dug it. He came back to me with some ideas and I was like, well, let's go with it. And he actually sent over his first sample chapter just last week. And then I did an edit on it and I did the revision on it. And yeah, so there's going to be a novel adaptation of my unproduced screenplay Autograph written by me and this other writer who shall be named soon. Like I said, I don't want to name him here because I don't know if he wants to have his name out there yet. But so there's that. And then there's a screenplay. Like I said, I wanted to make weird indie films that are personal. And you might have, if you've been a friend of mine on Facebook for a few years, when I moved to Michigan, I wrote a screenplay called The Back Scratcher, which is a horror movie, and it's a very, 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 very personal story. It's based on things that actually happened in my life, but turned into a horror movie. And that screenplay is basically done and ready to go. And I just don't have the money to make it, but that is what I intend to be my next film. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's a horror movie. It's about a guy fighting his childhood demon, and and it gets a little more complex than that. But that's a screenplay that's very, very near and dear to me, and that's what I want to do as my next film.
Well, each of those projects sound incredible, and I know that I will be looking for every single one of them. And Vincent, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today about your film and your work.
Thank you for having me, man. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely my pleasure, and I will let you know when this goes live. Thank you so much.